It's not an attempt to correct an imbalance, but I think it may function that way. For me, it was an answering of questions. I started with a question I couldn't answer. Why are white people called Caucasian? Why? So that was where I started asking questions, and it went from one thing to another. There are two ways of talking about it. One is just to notice that there's some people who are kind of light-skinned, and other people who are kind of brownish, and other people who are kind of darkish. So people notice that, immediately. But since there wasn't a lot of motion around from one's town or one's village, that didn't come up very much. So somebody like Herodotus, for instance, who did travel, he could say that, for instance, the Scythians who made quivers out of the arms, the skinned arms of the people they vanquished, that man's skin is very showy and white. So it was clear that people were light-skinned. But to make it into something called a race or variety, and then to endow that with certain characteristics, racial temperament, for instance, that latter kind of way of dealing with race, that's an invention of the Enlightenment of the 18th century. When we think of science, science is a truth that's true no matter what, no matter when, and for all time. And science as the kind of gospel truth replaces the gospel, which was religion. Before science, before the 18th century, religion answered the questions. And so in the 19th century, for instance, there was a real jostling between science and religion over the truth. And this is why Darwin was so controversial. But by the 19th and 20th century, science and taxonomy had created categories of all sorts of things. Carolus Linnaeus, 18th century, is the father of taxonomy, that is, of categorizing things. And so that science of categorizing things comes out of the 18th century, comes out of the Enlightenment, and counts up everything and gives it a name, including people. Not so much racism, because race hadn't been invented yet, but the big differences were religious. So on the one hand, Catholics and Protestants, on the other hand, Christians, Jews, and Muslims. So religion was the big defining factor before race. And in fact, as we see in our own world, religion still plays a very important part. And it plays a part in a way that race does, in that you can say that somebody has a particular religion, and then that conjures up all sorts of other ideas about what's in that person, how that person thinks, how that person goes through his or her everyday life, what it means to be a man or a woman. So there's lots that we pack into these categories, whether they're racial or religious.